In this video, I will show you step-by-step process of how I make these cutting boards, how I square them up, how I use my handmade jigs to do the grooves, and how I get a nice and smooth finish. I start with rough lumber and I measure a couple inches extra because when I square it up, it's always good to have a couple extra inches. And the way I do it is I glue up 2 cutting boards at once because it's more efficient to glue them up longer than just cut them in half, and then I'll have 2 cutting boards with 1 glue up. I am using the jointer to get one straight edge, and I realize this isn't going to give me a perfect 90-degree angle on the edge, but it will be straight enough to run it through the table saw to get my strips. I cut them at 1 3/4 inches, and that is a 1/4 inch thicker than the finished product, but once they plane down and get sanded, then I will have my 1.5 inch thickness for my cutting boards. Back over to the jointer to get one flat edge. I do this first because it gets the one side flat, and then I run them through the planer to get the other side flat. As these run through the planer, I will introduce myself. I am Jason and I live in Pennsylvania and have my own woodworking business. And I sell these cutting boards. They are available on Amazon or you can buy them on my website. The links are in the description. I check each piece to see if they need to run through the planer again or if they have any defects. And if they look good, I lay them out and get ready to glue up. I try not to over glue because obviously I don't want to waste glue, but I always try to have enough so it squeezes out to make sure I get every single piece glued up properly. And I only use the clamps on the bottom because with it being 1.5 inches thick and everything plain flat, I never have any problem with it bowing. If the glue is scraped off now, it's easier and it's just better to run through the planer that way. I usually try to keep it clamped up 6 hours, and that might be longer than needed, but the longer the better. Scrape off any extra glue and run it through the planer a couple times. And this is why back when I said my edges aren't 90 degrees on the jointer when I was jointing my rough lumber, see now all the edges are getting completely the same, flattened the same. Then I square up one edge on the jointer. I use my table saw sled to square up one edge, and this is where you see it's efficient to do it 2 boards in 1 glue up because I ran it through the planer all at once, ran it through the jointer all at once, and now I have 2 cutting boards. I moved my fence over to get the final dimensions of 13 inches and cut that. The drum sander takes any chip outs or marks from the planer, and then I start hand sanding it with 80 grit. I use a router to put a chamfer on the edges, and for me I think it's better to do the corners first and then go around and do the edges. This is an idea I had to make my juice grooves. This is adjustable so it fits different size cutting boards, and my router runs along the edge and puts a nice juice groove in it. This is another jig I made to make the handle grooves, and I use the same bit for both the juice groove and the handle groove. Next I use 120 grit sandpaper to sand the edges, and I sand the juice grooves. Then I use my electric sander to sand the surface of the board. Here I am spraying water on the boards because this raises the grain before the final sand, and raising the grain, it makes the grain stick up. So then when it gets wet in the future, it will stay smooth. I heat up my branding iron and burn my brand on it. And now time for the final sand. For the final sand, I use 220 grit sandpaper. I brush off the dust, and now for the best part, the oil. It brings out the beauty in the wood. And the link to this oil is in the description. If you watched the full video, thanks, I really appreciate it. And if you have any suggestions for my next videos, just let me know in the comments.